Whitney Houston's vocal power intimidated every singer in the 80s. Here's what they did next. The voice that changed everything. The year was 1985, and the music industry was about to experience a seismic shift that would redefine vocal excellence for generations to come. Whitney Elizabeth Houston, a young woman from Newark, New Jersey, stepped into the spotlight with her self-titled debut album, and nothing would ever be the same. Whitney wasn't just another singer with a pleasant voice. She possessed an instrument so powerful, so technically flawless, and so emotionally devastating that it sent shockwaves through the entire music community. Her range spanned 3 octaves with crystalline clarity, her belting could shake concert halls, and her control was so precise that she could execute runs and riffs that seemed physically impossible. But it wasn't just the technical prowess that made Whitney's voice so formidable. It was the effortlessness with which she wielded this power. While other singers strained and struggled to hit high notes, Whitney soared through them as if they were the most natural thing in the world. She could transition from a whisper-soft falsetto to a chest voice belt that could shatter glass, all within a single phrase, and make it sound as easy as breathing. The impact was immediate and profound. When Saving All My Love for You climbed to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, followed by How Will I Know and Greatest Love of All, the music industry realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a talented newcomer. This was a once-in-a-generation voice that would become the benchmark against which all others would be measured. Recording studios across America began to buzz with nervous energy. Established artists who had dominated the charts for years suddenly found themselves questioning their own abilities. Producers started comparing every female vocalist to Whitney, often finding them lacking. The phrase, "Can you give me more, Whitney?" became common in recording sessions, creating an impossible standard that would haunt singers for decades. Behind closed doors, the intimidation was palpable. Veteran performers who had sold millions of records found themselves doubting their craft. How could they compete with someone who seemed to have been blessed by the gods themselves? Whitney's voice wasn't just good, it was transcendent, otherworldly, and seemingly unattainable. The psychological impact on her contemporaries was immense. Some singers reported feeling physically ill before performances, knowing that comparisons to Whitney were inevitable. Others considered leaving the industry altogether, convinced they could never measure up. The pressure wasn't just about hitting the notes. It was about the entire package: the power, the control, the emotion, and that indefinable quality that made Whitney's voice instantly recognizable after just a few notes. If you're fascinated by how Whitney Houston revolutionized the music industry, hit that subscribe button. We're diving deep into the untold stories of music's greatest legends. The stories from behind the scenes paint a vivid picture of just how intimidating Whitney's presence was in the 1980s music scene. At the 1986 Grammy Awards, when Whitney performed Saving All My Love for You, several prominent female vocalists were spotted backstage, visibly shaken after hearing her live performance. One anonymous R&B singer later admitted to her vocal coach that she had cried in her dressing room, convinced her career was over before it had truly begun. Mariah Carey, who would later become one of the few vocalists capable of matching Whitney's technical abilities, has spoken openly about the pressure she felt as a young artist. In interviews, Mariah recalled how record executives would constantly reference Whitney during her early recording sessions. They'd say, "Whitney can do this," or "Whitney hits that note this way." Mariah remembered. It was like trying to live up to a ghost, except the ghost was very much alive and dominating every radio station. The intimidation extended beyond just vocal ability. Whitney's stage presence was magnetic, her beauty was undeniable, and her crossover appeal was unprecedented for a black female artist in the 1980s. She was breaking barriers and setting records that seemed untouchable. Her debut album spent 14 weeks at #1 and became the best-selling debut album by a female artist at the time. Every subsequent release raised the bar even higher. Celine Dion, another powerhouse vocalist who emerged in the late 1980s, has been remarkably candid about Whitney's influence and the pressure it created. "When I heard Whitney, I thought, how can I ever sing like that?" Celine admitted in a television interview years later. "She made me want to be better, but she also made me terrified that I would never be good enough." The technical aspects of Whitney's voice became the subject of intense study and analysis. Vocal coaches across the country dissected her technique, trying to understand the mechanics behind her extraordinary abilities. They noted her exceptional breath control, her ability to maintain consistent tone across her entire range, and her masterful use of vibrato. But even when the technical elements were identified, replicating them proved nearly impossible. Recording engineers and producers faced their own challenges. Whitney's voice was so powerful that it required special microphone techniques and studio setups. Her dynamic range, the difference between her softest and loudest notes, was so vast that it pushed the limits of recording technology at the time. Other singers who attempted to emulate her power often ended up straining their voices or producing harsh, unpleasant tones. The psychological warfare was unintentional but devastating. Whitney herself was known for her kindness and generosity toward other artists, but her mere existence created an atmosphere of competition and comparison that was inescapable. Radio programmers would play her songs back-to-back with other female vocalists, and the difference was often stark and unforgiving. Young singers entering the industry in the mid to late 1980s faced a brutal reality. They would be compared to Whitney Houston whether they liked it or not. Record labels actively sought the next Whitney, auditioning countless hopefuls and rejecting them for not measuring up to an impossible standard. This created a generation of talented vocalists who struggled with confidence and self-doubt, even when they possessed remarkable abilities in their own right. Are you enjoying these behind-the-scenes insights? Drop a comment below and tell us which 80s singer you think handled the Whitney Houston era best. Faced with the seemingly insurmountable challenge of Whitney Houston's dominance, singers in the 1980s developed various strategies to survive and thrive in her shadow. These approaches would not only define their careers, but also reshape the landscape of popular music in unexpected ways. Strategy 1. Embrace a different lane. Some artists made the wise decision to stop competing directly with Whitney and instead carved out their own unique musical identities. Madonna, for instance, never tried to be a vocal powerhouse. Instead, she focused on being a complete entertainer, a dancer, a provocateur, a visual artist, and a cultural icon. While Whitney dominated the ballads and vocal showcases, Madonna owned the dance floor and the controversy. Janet Jackson took a similar approach, developing a style that emphasized rhythm, choreography, and production innovation over raw vocal power. Her album, Control, released in 1986, showcased a different kind of strength, personal empowerment, and artistic independence. Janet's breathy, intimate vocal style was the antithesis of Whitney's powerful belting, and it worked brilliantly because it wasn't trying to compete on the same terms. Sade represented yet another alternative path. Her smooth, jazz-influenced sound and understated vocal delivery created an atmosphere of sophistication and cool that was worlds away from Whitney's emotional intensity. By refusing to engage in the vocal gymnastics that Whitney had made popular, Sade established herself as an artist of substance and longevity. Strategy 2. Find your unique vocal identity. Other singers chose to stay in the vocal powerhouse category but worked tirelessly to develop distinctive qualities that set them apart. Anita Baker's rich, contralto voice offered something Whitney's soprano couldn't, a warm, mature, jazz-inflected sound that appealed to a slightly different audience. Her album, Rapture, became a massive success in 1986, proving that there was room for different types of vocal excellence. Tina Turner, already an established legend by the 1980s, leaned into her rock and roll edge and raspy, lived-in vocal quality. Her comeback album, Private Dancer, showcased a voice that told stories of survival and strength, a stark contrast to Whitney's pristine, church-trained sound. Tina's voice had grit and experience that resonated with audiences in a different, but equally powerful way. Patti LaBelle, another vocal powerhouse who predated Whitney, refused to be overshadowed. She doubled down on her theatrical, gospel-influenced style, delivering performances that were so emotionally raw and vocally adventurous that they occupied their own category. Patti's approach was to be more daring, more unpredictable, and more willing to take vocal risks than anyone else. Strategy 3. Collaborate and innovate. Some artists recognized that the music industry was changing and that survival meant embracing new sounds and production techniques. They worked with cutting-edge producers and incorporated elements of hip-hop, electronic music, and world music into their sound. Chaka Khan, a vocal powerhouse in her own right, began experimenting with more contemporary production styles. Her collaboration with producer Arif Mardin on songs like I Feel For You showed how a legendary voice could adapt to new musical landscapes without compromising its essential character. The rise of hip-hop and R&B fusion in the late 1980s also provided opportunities for singers to showcase their talents in new contexts. Artists like Mary J. Blige, who would emerge in the early 1990s, would later perfect this approach, combining powerful vocals with hip-hop beats and street credibility. Strategy 4. Focus on songwriting and artistry. A number of singers shifted their focus from pure vocal competition to becoming complete artists and songwriters. Tracy Chapman burst onto the scene in 1988 with her self-titled debut album, which showcased thoughtful, socially conscious songwriting and a distinctive folk-influenced sound. Her voice was intimate and honest rather than powerful and soaring, and it connected with audiences who were hungry for authenticity. Suzanne Vega, Sinead O'Connor, and other alternative artists of the late 1980s proved that commercial success didn't require Whitney-level vocal acrobatics. Their emphasis on songwriting, artistic integrity, and emotional authenticity created space for different kinds of female voices in the music industry. Strategy 5. Patience and persistence. Perhaps the most important strategy was simply to persist and wait for the right moment. Many singers who felt overshadowed by Whitney in the 1980s would find their own success in the 1990s and beyond, once the industry and audiences had expanded their definition of vocal excellence. The Whitney Houston phenomenon, intimidating as it was, ultimately expanded the possibilities for female vocalists. It raised the bar for technical excellence while simultaneously creating demand for diversity and individuality. Singers learned that they didn't have to be Whitney Houston. They just had to be authentically and excellently themselves. Loving this deep dive into music history? Smash that like button to help us reach more music lovers like you. As the 1980s drew to a close and the 1990s began, the full impact of Whitney Houston's influence on the music industry became clear. She hadn't just intimidated her contemporaries. She had fundamentally changed what was possible and what was expected from female vocalists. The technical standards for pop and R&B singing had been permanently elevated. Vocal runs, melismas, and power belting became essential tools in every singer's arsenal. Music schools and vocal coaches restructured their curricula to include the techniques that Whitney had popularized. Young singers growing up in the 1990s and 2000s would consider Whitney's abilities not as exceptional, but as the baseline, a shift that would produce a new generation of technically proficient vocalists. But the legacy was complex and not entirely positive. The Whitney standard created unrealistic expectations that led to vocal strain, injury, and burnout for countless singers who pushed themselves beyond their natural limits trying to emulate her. Vocal coaches began reporting an epidemic of young singers damaging their voices by attempting techniques they weren't physically ready for. The emphasis on vocal power and technical prowess also, at times, overshadowed other important aspects of artistry. Some critics argued that the post-Whitney era produced singers who were technically impressive but emotionally hollow, vocalists who could hit all the notes but couldn't connect with audiences on a deeper level. The balance between technical skill and authentic expression became an ongoing conversation in the music industry. However, many of the singers who had been intimidated by Whitney in the 1980s eventually found their voices, both literally and figuratively. Mariah Carey emerged in 1990 with her debut album and quickly established herself as Whitney's only true vocal rival, matching her range and power while adding her own signature whistle register. The friendly rivalry between Whitney and Mariah throughout the 1990s pushed both artists to new heights and gave audiences some of the most memorable vocal performances in pop music history. Celine Dion's breakthrough in the English-language market in the 1990s proved that there was room for multiple vocal powerhouses. Celine's emotional intensity and her willingness to be vulnerable in her performances created a distinct identity that complemented rather than competed with Whitney's legacy. Even artists who had taken different paths in the 1980s found that Whitney's influence had helped them. Madonna's longevity and continued relevance demonstrated that artistic vision and reinvention could be just as valuable as vocal ability. Janet Jackson's emphasis on production and performance showed that there were multiple ways to be a successful female artist in pop music. The singers who thrived in Whitney's shadow were those who learned the crucial lesson: inspiration doesn't require imitation. Whitney's gift to the music world wasn't just her incredible voice. It was the challenge she presented to every artist to find and develop their own unique strengths. By the mid-1990s, the music industry had evolved to accommodate a wider range of female vocal styles. The alternative rock movement brought artists like Alanis Morissette and Fiona Apple, whose raw, emotionally direct vocal styles were a deliberate rejection of the polished perfection that Whitney represented. Hip-hop and R&B continued to fuse, creating space for artists like Lauryn Hill and Erykah Badu, who combined singing with rapping and emphasized groove and feel over pure vocal power. Whitney herself continued to evolve as an artist, taking on acting roles in films like The Bodyguard and Waiting to Exhale, which expanded her influence beyond music. Her rendition of I Will Always Love You from the Bodyguard soundtrack became one of the best-selling singles of all time and introduced her voice to new generations of listeners. The singers who had been intimidated by Whitney in the 1980s eventually came to appreciate the gift she had given them. She had forced them to dig deeper, to find what made them unique, and to develop the resilience necessary for long-term success in the music industry. Many of them would later cite Whitney as a crucial influence, not because they tried to sound like her, but because she had challenged them to be better versions of themselves. The tragic aspects of Whitney's later life and her untimely death in 2012 added another dimension to her legacy. Her struggles with addiction and the pressures of fame served as a cautionary tale about the costs of perfection and the importance of mental health and self-care in the entertainment industry. The singers who had once been intimidated by her perfection now mourned the loss of a flawed but extraordinary human being. Today, Whitney Houston's influence can be heard in virtually every female pop and R&B vocalist. From Beyoncé to Ariana Grande, from Jennifer Hudson to Adele, the technical standards and emotional intensity that Whitney brought to popular music remain the foundation upon which contemporary vocalists build their careers. The singers of the 1980s who survived and thrived despite Whitney's intimidating presence taught future generations an invaluable lesson. Greatness in one artist doesn't diminish the potential for greatness in others. The music industry is not a zero-sum game where one person's success requires another's failure. Instead, extraordinary talent raises the bar for everyone, creating an environment where excellence becomes the norm rather than the exception. Whitney Houston's vocal power didn't destroy the careers of her contemporaries, it transformed them. It forced them to innovate, to find their unique voices, and to contribute to the rich tapestry of popular music in ways that might never have happened if they had been able to rest on their laurels. The intimidation they felt in the 1980s became the catalyst for the diversity and creativity that would define popular music in the decades to come. We've reached the end of this incredible story. If you enjoyed learning about Whitney Houston's impact on music history, please subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the legends who shaped the sound of our lives. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Which artist do you think best navigated the Whitney Houston era? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.